Hey, right now on the flip side, we're going to talk about one of the most controversial, nerve-wracking issues that ever gets brought up in church. What is it? Well, you got to join us on the flip side. Here we go, guys. Hello and welcome to the flip side. I'm joined here by Scott Center and Jason Caine, the dynamic duo of our Blue Oaks campus.
Yeah, buddy.
We're going full Blue Oaks here, man. So, by the way, if you go to one of those other loser campuses like Adventure or Granite Bay or Midtown or Folsom, or you don't know anything about Bayside at all, This is the campus.
This is the campus.
There are no lies being told right now, Curt.
So, and they really, really do well, especially in the area of humility, as you can tell.
We're doing a conference.
I threw everyone else at Bayside under the bus, and you guys just joined in right there.
We take
failed the test.
Yeah,
man.
take it. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, this has gotten off to a rough start, so let's go ahead and get some caffeine in us.
Always need
And then
caffeine.
maybe Jesus will show up. Hannah, what are we drinking?
Costa Rican. Blue Bottle. Blue Bottle's out in the Bay Area.
Oh, we got 1 week of African on my birthday week, and then boom, right back to the South American. That's all right. I love the South American coffee. I'm not picky.
I'll just...
What
It's Amazon Prime, all the coffee that you need. So that
What are
every
the-
week
what
it's
are-
exactly.
what are the notes?
Graham cracker.
Really?
It was like graham cracker, marshmallow, and chocolate. That's what it was.
Okay, be honest with me
Basically
out there.
a s'more, but without it being a s'more.
Be honest with me.
This
Center-
is like a s'more?
It's
Without being a s'more.
It's like
Oh, I
you
gotcha.
open your
Okay,
cup up.
you two, be honest with me. We're going to talk some really incredible content.
Okay.
Be honest with me. Can you taste any notes when you drink the coffee?
No.
No.
See, I did
Not
too
at
much
all.
nasal steroids in the 80s. Like the Afrin and stuff. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I get hot and coffee.
Yeah, that's what it tastes like to me. Hot coffee.
But Hannah and Haley and
You
these
have
guys,
to-
they
you
have a
have
more
to, like-
sophisticated palate than
It's
us.
kind of a
Just
hint
swirl
of...
it around. You have to like slurp it.
Yeah, it's
That's
kind
how
of
when you taste
a
it,
hint
you do a
of
spoonful when you slurp
dirt
it.
in there somewhere.
hint of
Make
dirt?
a little-
Let
yeah,
me
just a
see.
hint of dirt.
Try
Okay,
that
so
one more
I'm
time.
assuming
Some gravel,
they didn't tune in
little cement.
to hear us talk about swishing coffee in our...
All right. So what's the real
But we
subject?
do we do record Flipside in a moment in the day where I need some coffee, and we are talking about a topic that is actually deserves our full attention and weight and the content of you two theological geniuses. And here it is. We're going to talk about generosity. We're at the 1 year anniversary of what we do around here at Bayside, which is Compassion First campaign. Let me just explain that for everyone. Compassion First means we don't collect any offerings around here that we don't actually, the first thing we do is we pour out compassion and resources and generosity on other people. We think churches just do too much of collecting the money and spending it on what they need, and we're trying to change that. We're trying to make it uncool to take offerings and not unleash compassion. So we're giving right now in our campuses, we're giving reports on what we've done in that year. We're absolutely on this journey of going, how can we challenge each other to be just way more compassionate and sacrificial and spirit-led in our giving, which is interesting. So you guys preached on this at Blue Oaks, Andrew and I and Lincoln taught on it. This is kind of the behind the scenes or the extra content of the sermon. Here's the first question I want to ask. When you guys were teaching on this, did you feel this? I always feel just the second we mention anything about money, even if it's just radically compassionate, awesome stuff, there's a tension that comes in the room. Why in the world is it so hard to have a conversation about faith and generosity?
Yeah, I mean, we felt it this last weekend,
Absolutely.
especially when we were talking about it. But I think one of the reasons is because it's the last bastion of control for most Christ followers, and that doesn't even include people who haven't come to faith yet. But it's that last thing that we want to hang on to. That is ours. So I asked a question this weekend. I said, "How many of you trust God with your salvation?" The whole place, the hands went up. I trust God with their salvation.
I'm going to heaven.
And what is interesting is how come we won't trust Him with our finances? It seems to be that last thing
Because
that we won't let
food,
go of.
the food and housing in heaven is awesome, and the healthcare is incredible.
Right.
Down here, it's a little sketchier.
Right, for sure, man. So I think it's that. I think
A
one
controlling-
of the things, a control issue.
I agree with that. I feel that in my own life. I feel like I grew up really hungry. We didn't know we were poor, but now I look back and we were super poor. And I just go, I'm saving for a rainy day constantly.
Right.
So the second someone's challenging me to give some of that away, it feels insecure to me. Even if I believe in the cause, even if I believe in the organization, it just goes, that puts me in a more, I don't like how losing that control there.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think another reason, and this is pointing the finger back at us as pastors and ministers, is I think because people have seen the church do some terrible things with money and seen people get away with a lot of things with money, that they have a reluctance to do it. So, part of it is certainly the hearts of people. I think even in my own heart, there's a part of me that doesn't want to be generous all the time. But I think secondarily, there's a part of us that don't want to, none of us want to be duped, right?
Right.
We don't want anybody to take
Yes.
what we've worked hard for and use it in a way that we know wouldn't honor God.
So have you ever bought a car and then you run into someone who bought the same car and they got a better deal than
Oh,
you?
absolutely.
And you just felt like a loser?
Yeah.
Like
Absolutely.
you're paying.
Absolutely.
You paid what? What did you pay? Oh, about that. And I think there's a lot to that. So I have a friend of mine, Dr. Dan Pacoda. He used to do this whole talk on that exact topic. And he collected over the years every religious giving scam. And so he had the little green felt that you put in your wallet to bless your wallet that you can order. He had the little anointing water from Jordan. He had the little contact point Jesus Diamel, and he had all the letters and all the. And it's so funny because there is a certain percentage of the population that will fall for that, and there is absolutely a certain percentage of charlatan pastors who will appeal to them, and what it ruins the issue for everyone. That it just takes a little bit of Ananias and Sapphira to just mess up the whole conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Bob Valiant said this in our preaching team meeting. He said, Christians have certain cuss words that are cuss words around faith. And I thought about a couple of those, like in youth ministry, the cuss word is abstinence. You do youth ministry stuff, you say the word abstinence, and the kids are looking at you like, don't go there. But for adults, it's tithe, or it's money, and it's generosity. And it's because of the reasons that we're talking about, man. Like, we are close with our money. And to let it go means that you got to trust somebody with it.
Yeah, and I do think both are true. There's been abuse on the spiritual side, and there is a sense of like going, you can't fake it when it comes to giving. I can fake it when it comes to worship, and I often do, and it's actually a good thing.
Yeah.
Because just going through the motion puts me in the position. You can't fake it with money. You're either your heart
or you're not.
is either generous or it is not in that moment.
Right.
But what saved me in this is been Kelly, because she has no sense of this weirdness. And I think for me, what happened is we grew up lower middle income, month to month, no savings, not great health care, every single fourth week of the month, there's nothing in the fridge. My wife grew up on government cheese and moved, like her mom would rent an apartment and they'd pay rent for 6 months and then they'd stop and they wouldn't get kicked out for 6. That's how they survived. And I think you get to that level of poverty, and my wife just went, I've seen God provide, and it's a broken world, and there's that lack of control in her childhood has just made her this super generous person. And so I've learned to obey her. But it's still in me. Even this weekend, it's still in me. Okay, so we got this passage, Exodus 36, 4-7. We all read it. Now, I'm just going to reread it for some of you that weren't there, and also to review some that were. It's this moment. They've been slaves. They've been taking the tabernacle around. They're going to they've been taking the Ark of the Covenant around. They're going to build a tabernacle for it. Moses calls for an offering, and this incredible thing happens. So all the skilled workers were doing all the work on the sanctuary. They left what they were doing and said to Moses, the people are bringing more than enough. And, can you actually believe, as a pastor, that you get to a moment where you go, listen, our ushers have come. Pastor Jason, tell them to stop giving. We're overwhelmed by this. By the way, you get up the next week and say, hey, you guys, no offering this week. We're going to do an extra song because we're not done counting last week's. We were talking about this at Granite Bay, and Lincoln said, please text STOP to 56316, which is our go-to text thing for everything we do here. in your mind, as a theological thinker and a pastor, what created this explosive generosity? It's certainly rare. I don't think I've ever seen it at that level. I've caught in a whiff of something like this. What creates explosive generosity? What takes us from the awkward conversation to the miracle giving?
Yeah, so as I was preparing to preach the message this weekend, I was looking at all of kind of Exodus 32 through 36. So in chapter 32, they build a golden calf. They're done with God. God wouldn't want anything to do with you. The people are. And God tells Moses, like, man, go get your people. They're down there tripping. And when Moses comes down, what he has to do is remind them of the covenant God made with them. And that happens in Exodus 34:10. So I asked that very question, like, what was it that made this people who want to build an idol in one chapter, and then another chapter, they're given so much they made them stop? What was it? And I believe it was the fact that God reminded them of what he had done for them and reminded them of the promise he had given them. And I think more people would be generous if they were told, you know, if we had an alert this week on our phones, like salvation doesn't happen, the blood of Jesus means nothing, you're not saved. Imagine the panic that would cause in your heart. And then you show up and somebody reminds you of what Christ has done for you. You would be full of gratitude, and I also bet you would be willing to give.
Yes.
So it's just that the reminder of what God had done for them filled their hearts with gratitude, and we always see the result of gratitude is always generosity.
Leaders think that it's all about the right appeal.
Right.
But what you're saying is it's all about the right promise.
Yeah, exactly.
So you start with the promise, the appeal becomes easy.
100%. If I know my salvation is secure, then what does that do? When you really have a moment in your life, when you think about the fact that God saved you, there's just a certain level of gratitude that happens, and an outpouring of, man, God has done so much for me. I have a responsibility to do for others, and I do it in my giving.
And I want to jump on what Jason's saying, because within that, if you look at just natural dynamics, some group of people, whatever percentage, started the process.
Right.
Because a lot of, probably not 100% said, oh my gosh, the message got to me, the gratitude got to me. Somebody started it. There were some people who instigated and go, boom, I'm going to give all that I'm going to give. And then all of a sudden people started watching this and go, oh man, I want to be like that. I want to be like that. I want to be a part of that.
Every time I've seen this happen, Scott, that's the dynamic, is that a person becomes the catalyst, a family, a business. It's Don and Bridget Brewster who went to Cambodia and said, if this was our daughters, what would we do? We would give up our whole life. And that sacrifice facilitated all the financial sacrifice and all the personnel sacrifice that came out. That breaking thing. I also think here, I love what you did in terms of the context piece there, because the context is almost always the answer. When I was thinking about this weekend, I was thinking about Moses gets to this place where he's addicted to the presence of God. He's like, I'm going to go into the tent meeting. At one point, they're like, Moses, we need to move on. He goes, I'm not moving unless God's moving. I'm not moving unless God's moving. I think we underestimate the role of worship, and more than just worship, that sense of God's nearness. When we get near God, I start treating you better. I start giving more. I start living for eternity. I live at the highest level. I get out of the presence of God. I start worrying more. I start going over negative scenarios and thoughts in my mind. I think they're reminded of the covenant, and there's some preciousness to the presence of God in the Ark of the Covenant. We all know that the greatest theological movie ever made is Indiana Jones, Raiders of the Lost Tomb.
Right.
Because it's the one time in Hollywood where the presence of God comes close. The wax dummies melt in supernatural death at the end. But there's an awe factor in there where even if you're like me, I saw that. I was a completely unspiritual person, and I went, oh, what is that?
Yeah.
I think there's something related to the intensity and the power and the presence and the comfort of the presence of God and the miraculous generosity that comes out. It's like worship and giving are the same thing. It's just what you're giving,
Yeah. I mean, I think Romans, present your body as living sacrifice, holy, acceptable. Right. So the thing that you do, that we give to God, is we give our lives to God in worship. And I think also a part of our lives is what Scott was hitting on. We give our wallet to God as well. Yeah. But man, is it hard to get to that place where we give God our wallet. So worship, I think, and giving and generosity, there is such a connection to those two things, as you brought up, because it brings us into the presence of God, and it allows us it allows generosity to flow from our lives.
Yeah. So getting to that point, let me just ask you guys this straight up question. We talked about tithing this weekend. And there's a whole group of people, some of them I really respect out there going, tithing is not a doctrine in the scripture, and just tell me, what is your tithing journey story?
Yeah.
Where are you at positionally? And be careful, because this is an HR. No. We all kind of wrestle into that issue a little bit. At least I did. What's your story with tithing?
So Jason asked me to come up on this point and share my testimony this last week, and one of the things that Kelly and I have been doing since we've been married is we've been tithing since we've been 32 years. Been married 32 years, but we haven't always done it for the right reasons or right motivations. So really, when we first tithed, it was just about guilt. It was all about guilt. If you don't do this, God's going to be mad at you. If it just kind of make you feel bad, so you kind of reluctantly step into it. Then what happened is, as we kind of got going through life, it turned into more of an obligation, because you kind of go, okay, well, I'm a Christ follower, so this is something I'm obligated to do in order to fulfill the spiritual disciplines. I have to have devotions. I have to do all this stuff. I have to tithe. But in that season between now and then, God did something in our hearts where our tithing turned from religious obligation to a faith demonstration. So in other words, what happened in that time is that
That's great, Scott.
God dealt with me and said, this really isn't about money.
Yeah.
This is about, do you trust me?
Yeah.
Right.
And so what happened is God started to turn that in our lives. Tithing became more of this holy moment where I said, okay, God, I'm going to trust you with all aspects of my life, not just part. And so every time payday comes around now, that is more of a faith demonstration. It really is not about dollars anymore. It's about a faith demonstration. Do I trust God with my life?
Yeah.
So that's been our journey now. And what's happened is that all of a sudden, when you start demonstrating your faith, you get all this other stuff you get unexpected blessings. That you come out of nowhere that you wouldn't expect.
Right.
You get a realization that you're participating in kingdom building.
Right.
And we're talking about all the stuff that we got to be a part of, which, when you give, you get to be a part of all the ministries that go on in the church, sending people to Mexico and all this stuff that you're participating in, even though you don't necessarily get to be there.
Right.
And what happens is, all of a sudden, you start to hold all your earthly treasures a lot more loosely.
Right.
It just kind of goes,
Yes.
it's not that big of a deal.
Right.
So
it's way funner to see the results than it is to have the stuff.
Oh my gosh.
Like, I think you get to a certain age and you just go, my favorite thing to do is to clean out the garage. Like, every single thing in that stupid garage is an obligation.
Yeah.
It's an obligation to maintain and care for and move around in the dark. I want it just to be minimalist in there, and because it's way better. Like, I'm not using something, someone wants to use this.
Absolutely.
Go bless them and watch them do it.
Yeah, we had a
get the
pool
joy.
at our house in Cameron Park, and as our kids got older, we weren't using enough because I'm a cold water wuss. So, it's got to be 105, and my pool's got to be 85 to get in it.
Right.
So nobody's using this thing. So I told all the young married couples with little kids, you just come over, go in the backyard, use the pool. Why? It's got to be used. Why am I hanging on to this thing if it's not being used?
Yes.
So all these earthly things you start to hold a lot more loosely than you used to before.
Yeah, that's good. My journey is a little bit different than Scott's. I don't have a 3-part sermon series or anything of that nature. I'm not as spiritual. Man, but honestly, I learned about giving when I was young. I was like 10 years old.
Yeah, so your dad was a godly man.
Oh, yeah. My parents...
Was your dad a godly man?
My dad was awesome.
So
Awesome. Yeah.
my dad was a good man.
Yeah.
This is on the
Sorry.
internet.
Uh-oh, might be sensitive. So, anyway, I'm 10 years old. Somebody at church gave me $10 one Sunday. I told my mom, hey, somebody gave me some money. Will you take me to the mall? I want to buy a Super Nintendo controller. So I went to the mall, bought the controller, came home, showed my dad, hey, Dad, look what I got. Somebody gave me a controller. He was like, where'd you get the money from for that? I was like, I got it from so-and-so at church. He was like, did you tithe? I was like, did you do what? Tithe. Did you put $1 in church? I was like, no. He was like, well, take it back. put $1 in church, and then when you earn another $1, you can go buy it. And that's what he made me do. So I learned about tithing the hard way. And at that moment, I was mad at my dad.
Yeah.
But I also kind of knew as a 10-year-old, this must be a serious thing that I got to take serious. And then look how bad I turned out.
Yeah, exactly.
You know? If I wouldn't have done that, no. So it was my dad teaching me.
I blame everything good in you on your dad.
Pretty much, man. It was my dad teaching me that.
And Stephanie.
That
Stephanie
principle.
gets some credit.
They help out. My dad teaching me that principle early on in life about tithing, that, man, this is something that's important. So I learned it as a young kid.
Yeah.
But as you get into adulthood, it's something that God has to reinforce in your heart too. Like
Totally.
nobody was making me take
Totally.
anything back to put something in church anymore.
Totally.
But it's just sticking to what I had learned as a kid and see God be faithful. And this is also what I'll say about tithing, that it is a difficult thing to trust God on.
Yeah.
Sometimes we'll say, man, when I have more money, I'll tithe.
Right.
No, what I found is the more money I make, the harder it can be
Yes.
for or the louder my flesh will speak about, you know what you can be doing with that money?
Yeah,
you could be
yeah,
buying a
yeah,
car,
yeah.
doing it.
Yeah.
And so keeping that discipline and learning it early was the best thing that happened for me. But just making a commitment to do it over time.
It is interesting now that it's not, like as I even just honestly thinking about this question, it wasn't just one moment. I've had to regain the victory in this area. Like Kelly's, like I've said, is very generous. She's automatic. I'm the guy that struggles and goes. I see things coming down the pike financially, and so. But I'll tell you, the first time for me, the breakthrough time was this guy named Brian Nodder, and Brian was that crazy Christian in my life, who everywhere we were at, he'd like, let's go over there and tell those people about Jesus. And I'm like, Brian, we're studying right now. It's finals, and he'd be like, we're the only Bible they'll ever read. He was that guy. And he had this huge Bible, and he would like I'd get up and I'd be walking down the dorm hallway, and it'd be 4 a.m. and I would just have gone to about getting ready to go to bed from being an art major, and he'd come busting in. I just spent 2 hours in the forest with God. It was the greatest devotions ever. I was like, 4 a.m. Dude, and he was just wild and crazy that way. And we went to this financial thing that our campus ministry put on, like how to budget correctly. It was phenomenal. Taught me about interest and debt, like all the stuff you should have learned in high school, but they don't teach. And this guy taught on tithing in it. And this is the first time I ever heard it. You know, I knew nothing about the Bible, and I struggled with that. I was like, 10% is a lot. I was paying my own way through college, all my own clothes, all my own food. Brian just went, I'm doing it. And about a week after he started doing it, maybe a month if I think back on it, he was so poor, someone gave him some food, and I'm sitting in the Chi Alpha Ministry Center, and he shows up with his bag of groceries, and he's got like 3 top ramens in it, and a loaf of bread, and I'm like, what's that? He goes, it's 10% of the food someone gave me. He goes, I'm giving it to the minister.
Wow. Goodness.
And it just really convicted me, and I thought, that guy's got more joy.
Yeah.
He's less conflicted. He's just all in. And so that was kind of the first time I just went all in. And I honestly, that summer I went to the Philippines instead of working this really lucrative job I had offered to me at a plywood mill. And my parents were like, you're nuts. It's never going to work financially. It was the best financial summer of my life. All my bills were paid the next year. I got jobs off of that. I just, it's like that old saying, from the Blessed Life, who loves tithing? Tithers.
That's right.
Because it works.
That's right.
A couple other things I want to say on this too is like sometimes in the theological point of it, just get into this theologically. I don't believe this is a commandment like the 10 Commandments. I don't believe that. If it was a 10th commandment, it would be in the 10 Commandments. But I do believe there are lots of great principles in Scripture that are so easy to go, that works better if you do that. That works better if you do that. This is a principle Abraham did before the law. It's something affirmed in the law and the prophets. And then Jesus goes, hey, you strain out a gnat to make sure you're getting 10% right, and you should actually be treating people with more justice. Yeah. And then he says this is the interesting thing we forget. Do both.
Right.
Jesus doesn't go. And then you look at the New Testament church, and this is the coup de grace for me, what convinced me theologically. The New Testament church was not arguing from 10% down. Hey, these are just Gentiles, they've never given, they don't know what the giving history of the Jewish faith is. They weren't arguing for 10% down. They were living and arguing for 10% up.
Yeah.
And I've found the more I argue for 10% up, just the better my faith walk goes, the better my relationships go, the better my conscience feels. I have a lot. I am now currently 20 pounds overweight.
There you go.
My doctor might say 30. My wife is nice. She'll say 15. I have enough.
Yeah.
People say, does God provide? I'm like, look at me in profile. I can argue from 10% up.
Yeah, for sure.
So,
For sure.
Anything else you guys want to add to that? I got a couple more questions here, but on the tithe one, that is really the big one.
Yeah, the big one for me is, man, it is one of the promises I believe that we have from God in Malachi 3:10.
Yeah.
He talks about bringing the tithe to the storehouse, and then he says, test me in this.
Right.
Literally,
One of the only
test
places.
me and see if I won't pour you out a blessing that you can't even receive. And so it's an area where if you are a person who's been thinking about tithing, but you don't want to do it, why don't you just test God?
Yeah.
Say, God, if you say that you're faithful, I'm going to do what you said. This month, I'm giving 10%. And if you are faithful, I don't want to miss a bill. I want to see all my needs be met. God, I'm testing you in this and see if God comes through. It is one of the ways that you can validate God's existence, I believe, in our lives.
Right.
So my challenge to people would be, man, test God. And I say that with confidence because God says test him.
Yeah.
And if he doesn't fulfill it, it's on him. It's not on me.
Right.
But I know that he'll fulfill it. He'll come through.
I got one thing on with that. Generosity plus obedience equals more generosity, because there's something that's set in motion in your heart as you start to become generous. It just breeds upon itself. So there's, you think that, okay, 10% is a goal, I'll get there on my goal, and plateau, stop. But that's not how it works. Generosity starts to breed more generosity. And so when you get to this goal, then all of a sudden you're seeing how much fun you're having doing it. And so then you want to reach out and keep doing it.
Yeah.
It just works that way. It's
You know
a
what
spiritual
also,
dynamic.
That's a great point. That's a great point. You know what also generosity does? It produces opportunity. So I have a friend, and he's one of his childhood buddies is he's an venture capitalist funding firm in Silicon Valley. They were one of the people that gave money to Google to start. And one of the requirements is if you're going to get venture capital from them is they require that you give 10% of it away.
Wow.
And they do it strategically, and it's not a spiritual thing. They go, listen, if you are out in the community going, hey, we'll help build that park, we'll help do this, we'll help be involved in that, then what happens is when you go to get your permissions for your building or your ordinance needs to be changed or then they go, oh, no, these are the people that help us out. So generosity, actually, it doesn't reduce what you have. It increases what you have by creating more opportunity.
That makes me think about Bill Gates, right? So this generosity principle and giving 10% and all those things, I think generosity is like a universal principle for humankind. It's more blessed to give than to receive.
Yes.
Bill Gates had all the money in the world by the time he was 27, 28 years old. And he would be living a boring life right now. But what he's decided to do is give it away.
Yes.
And I think that he even is a testament that when you have a lot, or even when you have a little, if you decide to give, it gives you something worth living for.
Yes.
And so his life, honestly, if he climbed to the top of the ladder, he needed something to do, and he started to give things away.
Yes.
And the impact he can see in the lives of others because he gives, I think, makes a difference. So it's just a principle I believe you should follow, whether you follow Jesus or not. Generosity just does something wonderful for you.
Okay, Hannah, remind me in the future to tell, on the flip side, my Bill Gates Thai restaurant story with Paul Carroll.
Oh, yeah.
It's a really, really good story. We don't have time for it today. And I wanted to ask one last question.
It made me think about Sonny Ball.
So we talked about this after the tithe. So first of all, the gratitude of the promise and the presence of God creates the opportunity for generosity to happen. Then tithing, that's kind of like our go-to. Then there's another level, we call it the whatever percent, where you go, God's not calling everyone to give this, he's just calling me. Why should people be spirit-filled, God listening to, God responding to, risk-taking givers? Why should someone stop, turn around, and go back and give their coat away to a homeless person? Why should someone decide they're going to write a check at the end of their bills and go, you know what, this is going to put us in a tight straight this month, but man, I'm giving this extra something to this cause, this thing. And around here at Bayside, why should they be involved in the campaign, the Compassion First? Because that's what we're doing. We're at the whatever percent. What's your answer to that, Scott?
Well, I think you're entering into a spiritual adventure that we always talk about. We always talk about that the life of following Christ is supposed to be this great adventure. Well, in order to take a great adventure, you got to take some risks and put God to the test. And so when you do things like that and you respond to God, you really don't know what's going to happen as you respond, but that's where the adventure is. That's where the trust is. It is an adventure where you're exploring new realms and going down new paths. That's what an adventure is. When you respond to God and he says, okay, I want you to go take that homeless guy out to lunch. Well, you're scared, you're afraid, that's part of the adventure. But also you're exhibiting faith and trust, that's part of the adventure. You go have a conversation, could be good, could be, not so good sometimes, but that's all part of it. So you're entering into this spiritual dynamic of the adventure that we always talk about. Hey man, this is what we talk about. The life of Christ is a spiritual adventure. That's what I think.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I mean, again, Scripture says without faith it's impossible to please God. So one of the ways that you can show that you have faith, I think, is certainly in your giving. And I'm not saying there's a fine line between faith and foolishness, right? Where you give away your whole check, you haven't paid your rent yet, you got an obligation. Don't be foolish.
Superstitious.
Don't be
become someone that needs help. That's what Paul said.
Right. But I also think that believers should participate in giving because the impact we all can have together is greater than the impact than any of us can have on our own. There's a word in agriculture called proliferation. So it's when you put a seed into the ground and it builds something up and the seed proliferates. It multiplies over and over and over again. And that's what happens when we give. God takes what we have and he multiplies it with other people. Man, one of the things that I'm able to see the work that we do, part of Compassion First is that we built a school with AIM over in Cambodia. And none of us could have done that on our own. None of us at this table could have done that on our own. But to be able to know that I was a part of that, it's just, man, there's something fulfilling about that, and there's something to know about the generosity. But even more importantly, I think we should take risk in our giving. Is solely for our relationship with God. It's out of obedience. That if God has told you to do it and you're obedient to Him, that's the reason. Nothing else. And just watch how God is pleased with your obedience and how He shows His favor to you.
The amount of energy that we spend resisting obedience. I mean, it says when God told Abraham to take Isaac to the mountainside, He says early the next morning. If God ever asked me to sacrifice one of my kids, I might sleep in. But see, Abraham understood this idea. It's exhausting to be disobedient. I love that thing. My thing is, and I said this to the Granite Bay group, I heard on the radio this week that they're having free therapy offered to Game of Thrones super fans that are disappointed with the series end. So free counselors, free. It's a real deal. It's a serious story. They're really worried about people getting super depressed. And I'm like, the problem is, we have so many stories available to us. We've got stories on streaming services. We got stories on our internet services. We got literally in our feed. Go get your own story. Like it's okay to live through the Avengers every once in a while. But if you're depressed that that's the last Avengers movie first of all, they're going to make more as long as they make money. But go get your own story. And when you live that adventure and when you actually are obedient, something happens, and the story that you're going to be telling your kids and your grandkids and telling yourself when you're at your lowest, that go get your own story, and that starts with giving. So,
that's good.
Anyway, this has been a great conversation. Here's what I want to say about this. Normally, every single week, I ask you to share and but really, there's someone out there. Their breakthrough is on the other end of generosity. And it might not be their treasure, it might be their time or their talent, but just opening up their hands and literally one act of generosity might be the thing that really just breaks them out of this season they're in. Would you do me a favor? Think of someone and share this with them. Go ahead and hit that share button, copy the link, actually text them and say, you need to see this, so that we can actually do what our goal is here on the flip side, and that's not just think about the Bible on Sundays, but get the Bible into our life every single day. And by the way, thanks for watching. We'll see you next time on the flip side.